Hello and welcome back to Phenomenology Club, Nighttime Edition. I may be speaking in a bit of a softer voice than I usually do, even though I usually already do speak in a softer voice, but I'm speaking specifically right now in a softer voice because I live in a small studio apartment shared with another human being and a rabbit. One of whom is sleeping, one of whom is probably running laps around the room like a fucking madman. And I do not wish to disturb them in either of their activities. I hope that you all watched the last episode because I'm going to be using some of those ideas as a platform on which I will build some new ideas that I will introduce you to in this episode. In the last episode, I talked about how really it doesn't seem at present there's any reason to believe that anything separates human consciousness apart as being special from the rest of the animals except language. Language is the thing that lets us articulate our experience of the world back to our conscious minds and seduces us into fantastical ideas that because we can do this, our consciousness is somehow set apart. And that is why we create religions and entertain theories about aliens coming down to give us special wisdom, to help us rationalize this incredible feeling that arises out of our experience of being able to do this. The fact that I can sit here and wonder about my own existence in these crazy abstract terms and get super fucking trippy and weird with it, that fucks with your head. Of course you're gonna think that you're special. Of course you're gonna sit here and wonder about aliens and Jesus or whoever the fuck else. How could I not? And obviously, only being able to do any of this through the vehicle of language. We really don't think about how much we rely on language as a conceptual vehicle with which we zoom around the goddamn world of experience. Seriously, we conceptualize language more as this kind of tool with which we can communicate with the external world. But we take for granted, I think, how much we use language internally, how much it's the necessary toolkit to create life philosophies and worldviews. We think in words, and of course we think in ways other than words as well. But we don't really know how to think about these things in any way that doesn't rely on words. So what does it seem like the most logical thing to do then is, if we're trying to understand our own existence and experience and philosophize about how we exist in the world? Obviously, by examining language more closely. And that's why we want to talk about it. Firstly, what is language? A human construct. So that means, first and foremost, we have to be aware of its limitations. It's a human creation. And although it's always building on improving itself, it's been here for a long time. And as we know, as members that live in a society where lots of things that we experience and use daily started being built a long ass time ago, we know that there's probably a lot of crazy stuff in there that we wouldn't put in today if we invented language today, knowing all that we know already. Which wouldn't happen because we need language to know all this stuff, or at least act on it. Whatever. So what I want to talk about is the implicit logical bias hidden in language. Language is implicitly biased. And when I say biased, I don't mean biased in some social justice understanding of the words or an ethical understanding. I'm talking about pure logical bias. And when I say that, I mean that statements are typically weighted one way or the other. Example, one of the most simple goddamn sentences I could say right now. The apple is green. Okay? Not a particularly contentious statement, not that deep. The apple is green, whatever. But that statement, the apple is green, is technically biased. Why? Well, for one, we are approaching this from a phenomenological context, right? And from a phenomenological perspective, we are not going to assume that I or the apple exists, at least as outlined in our philosophy. I personally believe that I do exist. I believe that the apple also exists. I believe that the apple is green. But can I say any of these things assuredly? No, I don't believe so. So I'm not going to. I'm not going to live my life as if I or the apple don't exist. But when it comes to crafting a philosophy with which maybe I can gain some insight into my experience of being in the world, I'm not going to just be like, well, okay, it doesn't matter because if nothing matters, everything matters. If nothing exists, it all exists. Of course, I think I exist, so it doesn't matter though. It's not arbitrary. We're including it. Alright? Thank you. I don't assume necessarily that the external world exists just because I feel I believe that it does. I don't know for sure. So what's the point in stating that I do? It's so easy to concede that I don't. That doesn't then render me unable to do anything. Because I know I believe I do exist. I'm just saying, I don't know for sure. I don't know for sure that this apple exists. And furthermore, I don't know if the color I'm seeing reflected back to me is actually green. If my understanding of green is the same as everyone else's. Of course, from my experience of being in the world, I'm pretty sure I'm not colorblind. I'm pretty sure if I walked into the other room, wake my boo up and was like, what color is this apple? He would say green, okay? That doesn't necessarily mean it's green. Doesn't mean that I can go in there and wake him up and he's not gonna say it's red. Maybe my whole world will be flipped upside down. I don't know anything. So I'm not gonna assume that apple is green. So just by stating that apple is green, I am demonstrating a logical bias. So what? I know, it seems so arbitrary, but when you consider that that is one of the most basic statements about anything you can make, this object is that color. When you think about how simple that sentence is, yet how biased it is at baseline, you start to wonder, when we begin building more complex sentences like I'm talking in these videos, how much hidden bias is in literally everything I'm saying? Even if it seems arbitrary, is it compounding upon itself? Because usually I speak in much more complex sentences with much more conceptual ideas. How much hidden bias is there? And how is that affecting how I construct a worldview for myself that's meaningful and easy to be understood or comprehended? So this is really interesting because on the one hand, we're really reflecting on the arbitrary nature of language for one. I mean, words are only useful for their value, right? The word green holds no intrinsic value. The word green is valuable because it's commonly identified as this color that I'm seeing. And the word green or any other word to describe a color is really so utility that it doesn't easily become turned into something else. But think about other words, like the word biased itself. Just a second ago, I felt like I had to introduce the word biased itself with a little added referendum to explain that I wasn't talking about bias in the sense of some bigoted person or idea. Because the word biased is so frequently used in that context recently, in our context, 2018. And that's because the definitions of words are usually changing based on their contextual relationship with people, with history, with everything. Definitions of words are so nuanced. And that's because the definitions of so many words are so conceptual. I just said how the word to describe a color is so utility. Green, that definition is probably not going to change. But a word like biased, what does that mean? Think about it. What's the definition of biased? It's completely conceptual. Yes, there's a clear definition, but the terms of its definition feel so transmutable. For one, you can use the word in so many contexts. In a more neutral one, and when I say neutral, less inflammatory, less dealing with matters of people and injustice, and then you can use it in that context as well. So really, words have a fixed definition that everybody can reference, but the context of its usage is usually going to change a lot of factors about its intended meaning. Think about then what kind of infinite possibilities exist in these complex sentences where I am saying so many words per minute, and each word, even though it has a fixed definition, is relying on the definitions and the usage of the word next to it, and the way it's fitting into the overall sentence, and the way that sentence fits into the context of the person speaking it, and the way the person speaking it fits into the context of the modern world, the modern context, and how the modern context fits into the context of history. It's crazy, bro. It's crazy. It's crazy. Sentences, words are so arbitrary, right? I mean, how meaningless the fixed definition of any word is. At the same time, when you think about it in this context of implicit bias, it's like, holy shit, dude. I'm not getting anything at face value. You say a sentence to me, I'll write it down, I'll talk about it, I'll be like, okay, well, this is what they meant, But it's like the levels at which I am internalizing the sentence are crazy complicated. I don't just know what you said because you said it, and I know all the definitions and I'm constantly referencing them in my head like I have some fucking dictionary installed in there. I'm processing your words in real time, and not only am I calling these fixed definitions to mind in real time, I'm also processing all the things that you're saying between the lines and all the things that you're insinuating with your tone, with your usage of certain words. It's crazy. So really, it seems like the mechanism of action when it comes to language is these fixed, agreed upon definitions that we all reference and use, so that we're referencing the same words in the right way. But it's really so much about the internalized mental affect, the way that a statement feels. Phenomenology. The apple is green. We take this for granted. But when I think about it, when I say the apple is green, there is sort of this mental affect of assuredness. I make the statement with confidence. I approach the apple almost like it's my bitch. You're green. Everyone knows you're green. Duh. Is that useful? I don't know how feasible it is to adopt a whole lingual system in which I can bypass all of these biases, but I do think that it is worth thinking about. And this idea is not novel. There have been languages invented to bypass these mental processes I'm talking about. Look it up. E-prime, an invented language that completely omits all versions of the words to be, because it doesn't want to assume that anything is what it presents to you as. So instead of saying the apple is green, you would say the apple appears green. And what about there with that example? Saying the apple appears green versus the apple is green. If I go out and say the apple appears green, people are going to look at me like I'm a fucking freak. Isn't that crazy? I mean, what's the big deal if I want to say the apple appears green? And why do they look at me like I'm a fucking freak? The apple appears green. Like, you don't think it's actually green? It's like, I didn't say I did or I didn't do. Why can't I just leave the possibility open? And isn't that crazy? It's just like, it would be socially unacceptable to go around speaking this way, even though really you're not saying anything different. You're just not making some verbal confirmation that the apple is indeed green. And just thinking about how socially unacceptable that would be, it kind of trips me out. Most people would be like, yeah, sure, who cares? But it's like, dude, if we can't even like start at the basics, what can we do? I always think about gender pronouns. How useful are they? He did that. She did that. He washed the window. She washed the car. Is the information about their sex relevant? No. Do we treat it internally as relevant? I don't think so. But when you think about it, when somebody provides information that seems irrelevant, you're left to wonder, why is that relevant? Like what I was just saying with the apple. If I go out on the street and say the apple appears green, everyone's gonna say, why is she saying it appears green? Like, what do you mean it appears? Like, was she blind before? Is she having some sort of existential breakdown? When you say something that seems superfluous or irrelevant, the resulting internal mental affect is that that information was relevant. You try to understand why it was included. So even though I don't feel like I actively wonder why it's relevant to tell me that he washed the window, I do wonder to what extent I internalize this information as being relevant. Do you understand what I'm saying? Why does it matter that he said that? And why does it matter if she said that? And is it also possible that maybe because these kinds of things are so commonplace, I don't even realize that I am reading between the lines still? It just doesn't feel like I am. Because I have to admit, there is a different mental affect when I hear he said that versus she said that. I internalize those statements differently, even though it doesn't matter if he or she said that. Why is that? What kind of hidden, weighted biases are hiding in my psyche? And I don't want to get too into it, but it's worth mentioning here that when we talk about things like science being racially biased, being biased against women, being biased any which way, this is what people are actually saying. They're not saying that science as an entity has somehow crafted some nefarious agenda for itself to be discriminatory against any race or gender or sexual orientation. They're saying that the very fabric of science at its most essential form, the apple is red, has bias woven into its fabric. And this is really not that hard to believe, especially when you consider that science is a constructed conceptual system of understanding and speaking about things built with language, okay? So you think about it like language is the little ass Legos, okay? We use the little ass Legos to build a big Lego, use those big Legos, put them together. This is science. You know what I'm saying? And words aren't even the littlest Legos. They're just the littlest ones that we can understand at present. That's how far our microscope goes, because all we have to think about it is language. So yeah, that's something that frustrates me, especially recently where we're seeing all of these fucking race realists come out the woodwork, all these gender essentialists, whatever, talking about it's just science. To see all these people not understand that when people make the statement that science has a history of racism, of sexism, what they're saying is not that scientists have come together and decided to be racist or sexist or even are unaware of some bigoted agenda they have lying in the back of their head. They're saying that there are hidden implicit biases woven into the very fabric of science and of language itself. And any one of these might seem so arbitrary in an isolated context, but when you compound ideas upon other ideas, they quickly become more complicated, more biased. And the methods by which they're doing that can oftentimes become incredibly hard to even detect. And that's not to try and sound conspiratorial, like, oh, you can't even see it, dude, it's in there, I swear there's a conspiracy against bitches. Like, no, that's not what I'm saying either, even though there is. That's not what I'm saying. It's just so easy, I think, to see how we go about our days making statements like the apple is green, not contentious, but while at the same time not being able to even say the more true, unbiased statement, the apple appears green, without probably getting socially ostracized as being the town weirdo. The fact that I can't go around and say the apple appears green, that gets to me. And that makes it easy for me to see how biases can start so tiny, become so ingrained and commonplace in my psyche that I take them for granted and I don't even think about them. It's easy for me to believe that other sort of biases exist too in language, of course, and in languages built with other languages, hell yeah, of course, double of course. So that's why I think it's so important to actually think about language itself. How am I using words and how am I internalizing their implied statements? Because words are not only as valuable as their definitions, but also for their context. The definitions of words are transmutable and so nuanced. I mean, think about it. We use the same words often in such different ways. And beyond that, what else changes the definition of a word contextually? The tone, clearly. I mean, what's the difference between saying that guy or that guy? I just said that guy 2 times, but I said that guy so differently. And who knows if you even heard it correctly. Perhaps I didn't have an attitude, okay? I just said it in a way, and if you thought it was weird, that's on you. What about that? What about anything? This shit just gets infinitely more and more complex. I mean, language is like the goddamn solar system in your head. The combinations of definitions of words' relationships to each other, to their larger context, is just fucking infinite, dude. Infinite. My whole life philosophy, my whole world view is built with language. So how stupid are we to take language for granted? Stupid. I mean, even the fact that what I'm talking about right now, even though plenty of philosophers have addressed this, the fact that we don't talk about it more as a society, that this is some sort of crazy idea, and when you talk about it, people are like, what the fuck, bitch? Go get your master's or something. I don't want to talk about this crazy shit, you know? I mean, the fact that this doesn't trip people the fuck out, we don't talk about this more in the context of philosophical discussions, it's fucking nuts to me. So that's why I just talked about it. And I know that a lot of these ideas present as super arbitrary. I feel like when I started thinking about them, I was like, okay, whatever. But the more I thought about it, the more I'm like, goddamn. And I think that's because the more I repeat these arguments back to myself with language, the more I feel like I truly know them. You know? Because I feel so often I know a thing in my head, but Then months later, sometimes years later, I'll have this aha moment, like, wow, I knew this thing for so long, but right now I know it. Maybe how you do a thing, or how you feel about yourself. I'm cool. I know I'm great. I'm cool. But then, once in a while, I'll be like, you know what? I'm the shit. It's like, I know it. Even though I knew it. It's like, damn, right now I know it. Or, I know smoking's bad for me. But do I really know how bad it is for me? I don't think so. I know that it could kill me in terrible ways. I know it can. I've seen it happen to others. But do I really know that could be me? Because I feel like if I really knew that could be me, I would stop. But I don't. So I don't feel like I really know that smoking can kill me. I don't fucking quit. Anyway, I want to wrap this up with one idea to bring it back a little bit into the scope of Phenomenology Club, which is a club where we make art. I want you to think about these ideas in the context of the understanding that all language is abstraction. We are using these various pre-built systems of language to articulate back to ourselves these abstract concepts about how we are experiencing being in the world. Everything is an abstraction. The apple is green. I'd be lying if I said I know shit about science, but I'm pretty sure, the apple isn't actually green or some shit. I'm pretty sure the apple, isn't actually anything. It's just reflecting color back to my eye or some bullshit. So then what is the statement, the apple is green? What value does it hold? It's just an abstract way to understand this phenomena of me seeing this crazy color that looks different than other colors that it's around. Language is abstraction. All language is abstraction. When I speak and when I think internally, I'm not experiencing the world directly. I'm not engaging my own ideas directly. I'm experiencing this strange and amazing phenomena, all experiencing it, and then repeating back to myself with this finite, flawed system of language, my experience of being in the world. It's completely abstract. It's being abstracted on multiple levels. Multiple. At any given moment, there is an incredible amount of factors that are affecting my impression of being in the world. And just right now, I got a little pain right here. What the fuck was that? It doesn't seem to have any bearing on my thought process, but it really just changed my whole life in 1 second. You know what I'm saying? Everything is always changing how you're feeling, how you're processing your experience. There's so many goddamn factors. And language is the filter that I'm trying to make sense of the whole thing. So it's very important that we critique it and inspect it as closely as possible if we want to have any sort of insight into the human experience. And I think I have said enough. Good night.